Multiband. So I still think the multiband compressor is one of the most useful tools in mastering because it lets you compress the individual frequency ranges of your mix. And through that, you don't run into the trouble of, for example, having one broadband compressor compress the whole mix whenever, for example, the kick drum hits in with its prominent low end. Because when that happens, then you can run into the trouble of pumping. Okay, so last time we gave the mix a bit of peak control by tweaking the mix a little better and perhaps using a compressor in my mastering stage. And now with the multiband compressor, I want to give the mix a little bit more punch and a bit more edge and a bit more dynamic control, of course, and close in to the dynamic range and control that we want. So, as you can see here now, I actually ditched my compressor for peak control again because I feel the mix is good enough that I don't need it, okay? Now, let's talk about the splitting of the frequency ranges. So how will we go about it? Let's just start off with the first band. Let's solo this one. And let's take away any compression for now. All right. Okay, so basically with the first band, I want to get the kick drum, the bass, and perhaps a little bit of the guitars in there. So I have my low end there. And this seems to be fine now. Okay, then let's go to, or this is the way how I go about it now. First I set the first band, and now I actually go to the fourth band. And I want that to capture my air, so 10K plus. Yeah, something like this. And now with the third band, I want to capture the whole presence of the mix actually, and the range that's most audible to the human ear. So Fletcher-Munson curve again, hinted. So this can go to about 2 to 3 K. Yeah, and my second band is then technically automatically set. But I still want to check if there's not too much low end in it. But yeah, sounds fine. So this is how you could go about it. Another way you can go about it is the following. The low end only has the kick. So go to about 70 hertz. Or even lower. And then the second band has some low end and low mids in it. So this goes lower too. So to about 300 hertz. And then the third band has the whole upper mids in it and some high end. Yeah, and then the fourth band has the rest. That's also one procedure you could go about it, but I like to use this setting here. All right, and now let's think about the ratio. Again, remember we want to be subtle. And now I've repeated that so many times over the tutorial now that you probably hate it already. But if you hate being subtle, then you shouldn't master. Seriously. So, a ratio of about 2 to 1 will probably be as high as you'll ever need to go in mastering. Except if you want to mess around with some peak limiting with the compressor, and you may go higher there. But for general dynamics and a bit of punch, more than 2 to 1 can already cause some trouble, like pumping and whatnot. You'll actually find yourself using lower ratios most of the time, probably. Perhaps you've heard even of people using low ratios such as 1.1 to 1 or 1.2 to 1. But interestingly, they don't necessarily use that kind of compression to actually compress the mix. Rather, it's more to add the sonic characteristic of the analog gear they're using, or the analog simulation of a particular plugin they use. So if you have your run-of-the-mill free digital compressor, then that sort of low ratio approach might not make a whole lot of sense. But then again, this already goes into the realm of broadband compressors, so let's stick to multiband for now. I'm using Waves C4 here, as you probably already saw, and it doesn't really have a ratio parameter. It has something called range, which is a combination of ratio and a maximum gain reduction. It's some kind of a special processing law, I don't know. Anyway, so let me set it to a value that's somewhere between, let's just go with -11. That's something between 1.5 to 1 and 2 to 1. And I do that the same for all 4 bands, because we want to have a rather coherent compression across the whole thing. Okay, so we don't want to squash one band to Apple Jam and leave another one totally alone. That doesn't make any sense at all. That kind of thinking might be okay for mixing to do some very specific thing, but mastering, again, we want to have a broader perspective. So more coherent compression across the whole frequency range would be of benefit. Okay, now the attack and release time. Here it actually gets quite interesting. Let me just give you an example of the first band again. So here we have the kick and bass and a bit of guitars. And now with the attack time, we can sort of determine how much of the kick we want to let through. And this is quite the interesting idea actually, because when you have a faster style of metal, then you can also make the attack time a bit faster. And in that way, you get more control on the low end, and it stays tight, and it doesn't get overwhelming and wobble around like crazy. And if we have a slower style with a lot of power, then we can also make the attack time a bit slower to have more power in the kick. And so, depending on what you're working with, we can experiment with anything between 10 to 30 milliseconds, give or take, you know, just try different things. So for the low end, I personally think 20 milliseconds is a good starting point. And then for the release time, I don't want to go too slow at this point in my master chain. Because, yeah, I don't want to have a pumping effect. And when we compress too hard and have a too slow release time, then we get pumping. And especially on the low end, you know, I don't want the kick to hit, the compressor to reduce the gain, and then take too long to come up again. Because if it takes too long, then it keeps my bass guitar down whenever the kick hits, and I don't want that. So I want a bit quicker release time on that low end. But generally, also, then as I go up with the frequency band, then I also go a bit faster with the attack time and perhaps a bit slower with the release time. So the higher the band is, the more control I want to get on my dynamics. Okay, so those are almost decent settings here. Let me just set those roughly. That's good. This one can go slower. So you see, I like to work with release times between 50 to 100 milliseconds in the multiband. Okay, and especially the 2 higher bands. Here, it's very interesting how you can use the attack and the release time. Because imagine, for example, you have a lot of high end in the snare, then, or generally some harshness in the mix, then with the faster attack time and slower release time, you can sort of smoothen it out and you can tame it and you get, yeah, that's the control I'm talking about. Okay, so I now just roughly set all the parameters, and now I'm gonna go for gain reduction of about -2 to -3 dB on all 4 bands. So let's see where we are. That's more. Wait, first of all, let me just raise the gain of about 2.5 dB. And then I'm going to apply the threshold that my reduction line is going to 0 again. Okay, so there I have my rough setting. And now when I want to fine tweak it, of course I have to listen very carefully to how the whole drum and how the whole mix reacts to how this compressor works. Now let's check a before and after, shall we? Yeah. Not too shabby, not too shabby. All right, so that's that. So now also keep in mind, compressor does not equal compressor, okay? I've tried the exact same settings or similar settings with other multiband compressors like Ozone and the Studio One multiband, and they all sounded different. For example, Ozone likes to compress a bit harder and have more smack, and the Ozone multiband kind of sucked out some transient detail and some high end, and it wasn't very precise sounding. And now this C4 here has, again, as I mentioned, some specific processing law that it doesn't lose transient detail and it doesn't pump and squash too quickly. So this is really nice to work with. But again, just experiment with whatever you have at hand, and yeah, just get better plugins as your skills increase, you know? That's how I would recommend it. All right, and now where to position it? Well, in general, I like to keep the dynamic processing rather close to the beginning of the chain, together with the equalizer, because I want my frequencies and my dynamics to be taken care of and to be right before I go into any next steps. Okay, and then yeah, that's so far to multiband compression. It's actually not too difficult, really. It may be a bit difficult at first, but when you get the hang of it, it's actually quite. It makes sense how you go about it. Well, then next time is broadband compression. So, see ya.